You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at AMO, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. Before we get into today's podcast, I just wanted to have a small ask of the audience. For those of you that are listening today that have not yet subscribed, it would mean the absolute world to me if you could subscribe or perhaps leave a review. Been doing these episodes for quite a while now, and a few years, and it's been immensely rewarding having all of you tuning in each fortnight, and just having that support keeps me motivated to do more episodes and invite more guests. So if you could either leave a review, share this podcast with one person, or subscribe, it would mean the world to me. Now on to today's guest. So today's guest is Alicia Kearns. Alicia Kearns is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Render, as well as the founder and CEO at The Growth CMO. She is a strategic technical marketing leader with over 20 years of experience delivering enterprise and growth strategies for leading companies like LinkedIn, SAP, and Samsung across Asia Pacific and global markets. As an expert in brand, demand, and content strategy, she spent the last 4 years advising and working with fast growth tech scale-ups. I was very fortunate to work with Alicia early on in the business for AMO, and she is a wealth of knowledge. So please join me in welcoming Alicia to the show. Alicia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Fatima. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
I can't believe it's taken this long since we initially worked together many years ago for me to kind of get you on the show, but you seem to be doing quite a lot of interesting things lately, and I thought, I've got to get you on. We've got to talk about all of this sort of areas that you work in. And I know that, you know, in that sort of space, you've been working in both corporate sort of role, leading the CMO function basically, and then you've also been working in your own small business too. So how do you balance the both sides, knowing that both the corporate organization probably requires a different energy than maybe working with small businesses? What are the main differences between the two?
Yeah, gosh, it's a great question. Balance is the key, right? I think let's just throw life in there at the same time. It's not just kind of between businesses, but it's also that wonderful work-life balance that we all continue to work on to make sure we get that right. I think that absolutely, we're like anything, there are ebbs and flows in a corporate business, and I think, you know, if I think about some of the scale-ups that I've worked in and around, you know, they have cyclical kind of ebbs and flows and big spurts and spikes in their business. And I think you just have to you know, really temper your time, consider where the energy needs to be, primarily in your corporate situation first, and then certainly if you have a side hustle or the, you know, sometimes in a corporate environment, you know, you're going through the motions, you know, you're working to a greater purpose, but you need your passion to keep you engaged and energized. And I think that's when you're naturally going to seek out more work in that field, you know, double down a bit, lean into some clients who may have worked with previously, to really kind of make sure that balance of energy, passion, purpose is perfectly placed between a corporate and sort of a scale-up environment.
And then, like, thinking about the scale-up environment, you know, every business has got to start somewhere. What do you think that most businesses get wrong early on when it comes to sales marketing sort of space? And I guess, if on the counter of that, what would the right focus be in that space for a scale up?
Yeah, it's a great, and there's so many answers to that question, but I think that honestly, the ability to cut through and articulate your value is a very motherhood statement, but honestly, your ability to understand your category, your position in that category, then, you know, really what you do differently. It's very cliche. This is nothing new here, but really what you do differently to your competitors in that category is kind of your value, and so I think that a lot of companies that I've certainly worked with have been so thinking about 100 different ways to articulate their value. And so the simplicity and clear articulation of what it is you do, the companies that I think I've worked with or helped them to do that have been the most successful because everybody's singing from the same kind of message hymn sheet, but message framework.
Yep.
Everyone can say exactly what the company does. Everyone has a response to them versus their competitors. The product is tightly aligned. Product evolution and transformation and roadmap is tightly aligned to the value that we understand our buyers to have and our customers to have. So it's not easy. That is not a silver bullet, but honestly, that's where I think people either go well or go wrong in a scale-up environment. And I think revenue is fuel in a scale-up environment. So people sort of just go, I'm going to go over here and grab it. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And actually doing fewer, more impactful market activations, brand activations, sales team enablement activities would serve you so much better, I think, than sort of really trying to get after everything. And the temptation is so there in business because you want to say yes to everything. And I think the ability to really stay true to your true buyer, to your true value, I think is key.
It's interesting because we obviously engaged with you early on in our business, and you brought some of these things to the table. New business, brand new for us. It wasn't things we'd really thought about. And just even though it sounds so simple, as you sort of outlined, the value piece, it's something that people talk a lot about, but actually don't put it into practice. And I know that we continue to leverage, those, like I said, buyer personas and whatnot. And it really helps because it sort of centers you back to, where effectively you're going. So I think that's really helpful. One thing I'm thinking, and I wonder whether it's changed over the years, is, you talk about products and obviously projects are run to develop products and projects, across companies. But where is marketing engaged in that life cycle? Are they engaged too late at the, let's go to market now, let's get them involved? Or are they better off engaged at the beginning? Like, what's actually happening in that space?
Yeah, I think it varies, and I think it honestly it depends on the strength of your marketing team or your marketing leader, and which is fair, right? If someone's feeling like, so if a founder or a CEO or a product leader, often a CPO who's come in and is really driving a new business, or an established product leader is really going to want to have that equity and value from their counterpart. So I think that's a bit of a cop out, but I think that's definitely one thing. I think then marketing should be, any product should be driven by insight, and whether that be market or customer insight. So I think that marketing can play a really strong role in having that, what's driving the market, what are the key trends, what are the key insights literally at the start of that broad product development process. Then sort of almost step away, let the product team do their bit. But then, when it comes to, well, how are we actually shaping this up to take out to market for our customers? What are the things that our customers are telling us from a product perspective? I think that's when you re-engage. And I think, if you look at a product lifecycle or product delivery timeframe, it's going to vary business to business, but let's say an atypical one might be 12 weeks. You're in there at the start. Really, the preparations around taking that out to market should be about halfway. And so I think that's a good indication of, given a 6 to 8 week ramp to take something out and giving marketing the opportunity to really make sure it's as successful as possible and as personalized as possible, then I think that's how you would, that's how I definitely think about it. And, working at LinkedIn, no business is perfect, but they spend a lot of time in getting that go-to-market blueprint right. Who was engaged when, what did it look like, what were the no-goes, what were the non-negotiables? And even at Render, my current role, we spent a bit of time on that. And while you can put that down on paper, institutionalizing that and making sure it's embedded, and the product are pulling in the right folks when they need to, and marketing are engaging early enough, I think they're some of the things that I think about when I look at a successful, new product or product update.
And then thinking about the relationship between product and sales and marketing, I don't know. There's I guess feedback or views that I've heard that sales drives marketing, and then others will say marketing drives sales. Do you have a perspective on which way it is and why?
Yeah, I'd love to say that marketing drove sales, but in my experience, I've probably, LinkedIn was probably the closest I would say to where that's true. Microsoft, I know I've never worked there, but I know I've watched them, and I have lots of friends who've worked there, and I know they're an organization where I think could almost kind of put their hat on saying marketing there. So the fact that I could only think of them, and there's, on one hand, and probably a couple of other examples, I would say that in most environments, you do have, whether you frame it that way or not, you do have a sales-led organization, and typically the numbers don't lie. So just the volume of a sales team and just a pure people perspective far outweighs what a marketing team can scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that and that is something that a lot of marketing leaders I've seen, and I've been guilty of it myself, where you kind of fight that. Marketing has its place, and we need to have our, we're not a service function, which we absolutely are not. But sort of almost getting a bit of that friction, whereas actually going, how is it that we can fold respectfully? I think good marketing leaders realize they need to overstep into sales. Sales are never going to overstep into marketing and fill those gaps. It's always going to be that marketing has to step into sales and go, you know what, guys, how can we partner with you? Where are the gaps? What are the insights? And, how can we all work from almost a single methodology, so that, whatever we're saying in market, whatever we're talking at, through the funnel, whatever your teams are selling is just at least consistent. So I think that's a way to almost unify the sales and marketing teams together.
And you're right about some of those large companies. Like typically in the large corporate space, the marketing team is usually responsible for internal comms as well as external comms. So it kind of makes sense for them to overstep their boundaries into other departments so that they can get that messaging right. So I think that's really very important. Thinking about brands in general, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge facing brands in today's market?
We've touched on it a little bit. I think that the clear articulation of what it is you do is definitely one, and that's spending some time up front, doing the heavy lifting up front on that, I think is worthwhile, and engaging. And then it probably brings it to my second point, which is talent. I think that there's only limited senior, really, talented advisory marketing leaders, and there are thousands of brands out there. And so I think, people trying to learn this on the fly or on the job, or do it as a second role. Even I've seen like founders kind of work and be head of marketing, sales guys sales leaders who become head of marketing. I think just respect the art and the craft, and consider then, if you don't have the talent internally, where could you source some of that, particularly for growing brands. Because brand is not always you can build a long-term strategy for a brand and have people execute on that, right? You don't have to have somebody in there the entire time to continue to manage that, but think about, where you could get advisory, whether it be creative agency, whether it be consultant, whether it be a contractor. I know that the freelance community right now, there's a ton of, marketing leaders who are just helping brands. So, that's really interesting to sort of consider how you could, just insert talent into that. I think that's one other thing. And then I think the third is just your buyer profile, and really truly understanding who buys your product is the third part. So I think, Fatima, you've spoken about personas, and most people, listening to this will have had some exposure to that in their roles and some formation of that in their businesses. I think where you need to take that one step further is continuously monitor sales interviews, sales engagements, win-loss scenarios to kind of go, we could talk to these 50,000 people, or we could talk to these 10 really intimately and personally, because ultimately they're probably the ones that are going to buy our product.
And what about like thinking about actually probably on that, one of the things I've seen in a lot of organizations is the proliferation of those personas in project management, in heavy agile environments. Like it's actually great seeing that like concept actually being used day to day for projects, internal and external. So I think that's a really positive thing, and definitely one that when we experienced that ourselves for the first time, it really was eye-opening, because it wasn't something when particularly when you're a small business and you don't have capacity or resources. And to your point, I was wearing that hat at the time. You don't really have the ability to spend time doing what they at the time appeared to me like, oh, that's just something fluffy. But then when you do it, and then you use that and consistently use that to refer back to no matter what you're working on in the business, it actually is really powerful. So I think that's a really good example for sure.
Yeah, no, and it is a drudge sometimes to get that done, as you said, but that really pays off. And I think, the ability to think about what content you need to produce next, if you get a bit of writer's block, or if you get to a point where you're like, what's next? What am I going to talk about next to these buyers? It just gives you the framework to come back to.
It's interesting as well, because the whole concept of having these personas to effectively talk to, write to, etc. But then actually remembering to constantly use them when going out and doing your content, which is something that I know we forget sometimes. We just get so excited, as you pointed out before, and start releasing things and not actually thinking, is this actually tying back to one of our personas? So I think there's definitely a disconnect for some small businesses, particularly like us. When thinking about brand building, like when you're starting out and you're in the startup world, you've got this great product or idea, you're trying to build a business and you've got no idea what's going on in terms of the brand space. Is there any advice or learnings or insights you can share that would help a startup that would help them learn from, a past mistake of something you've seen?
Yeah, great question. I think that the way I think about it, and there's been two brands that have been built from scratch. Render, interestingly, now the company that's done exceptionally well in the construction technology space in the US, and another from scratch. So you sort of do stand there going, "Gosh, where do I start?" And so honestly, the first thing that by chance we did with Render was understand where the circles of influence were for that industry, for that customer and that industry. Where were the bodies, associations, groups, clusters, whatever they are, because every vertical has something similar, where there's a gathering of these businesses that you need to sell to. Because what that does, they hold the relationship, and you can then just work with that body, share your value, and then they kind of share that as a trusted content, trusted partner, delivering your information, your value, and your messaging in a relationship that's already trusted. So I think that that applies also to communities. So communities, and when we talk about communities, that could be, LinkedIn groups, that could be online digital forums. In some cases, it's Facebook. In the case of a smaller like B2B or a B2C brand, some of those Facebook groups are just jiving. So
100%.
it's finding the community and then adding value to that community in a way that respects the kind of structure and the values of the community. And so I think that honestly, if you're building out an audience and you need to get things moving fast, that would be one. And then I think, storytelling, you touched on it. Storytelling is not natural to most people, but I think that being able to understand, what stories are going to engage folks around your brand, whether it be your first customer, what they did, how it transformed what they did, not just sharing that as a case study, but what's the story behind it? How did it impact their end customer? You know, how is it changing the lives of the people using the software or the product or whatever it is? Like, I think that, you know, a lot of people go traditional PR. There's a lot of rational, you know,
Yeah.
steps that people take, which I think is very, I'm not discounting them in any way, but they can be expensive and they can be, you don't get the direct kind of feedback or outcomes out of that. Whereas if you can, you know, create content that tells those stories, or you can create small videos, or you can, you know, build customer pieces, whatever it may be, it's very broad. And I know that's not helpful in some situations, but I think being able to really consider, again, fewer, not more stories, but making them interesting and emotional and things like that. I think that would be kind of ways to really think about getting your message out, and then just understanding what channels work. You know, if LinkedIn is your channel, if Facebook, if email, if webinars, if events. Sometimes it is just about pounding the pavement and at trade shows, and building suppliers, or building a partner network where you know that there's going to be broader reach by, you know, you're one to one relationship, but they're one to many relationships. So
You, I want to go everywhere with all of this because that was really, really out there. I'm writing notes frantically, but so couple of things that really resonate with me that I, you know, really didn't think about. It's like the alignment to key bodies, I think is absolutely a great idea. And I think to your point, you've got to probably build trust. You can't just immediately start being part of that group. So I think that's something that really resonated. You talked about storytelling and coincidentally talked about case studies. For us, I've seen case studies being the most popular pages on our website. So it just reiterates exactly what you just said. And then in terms of like briefly talking about social, so I'm keen to know there's a lot of noise out there around being on every social media platform. And I think when we worked together, you have kindly highlighted that at that time we were reposting the same content on every social platform, which really doesn't probably meet the I guess the culture of that platform. What's your thoughts on how brands are using social media, and if there's any tips or advice you've seen that really resonates or works really well?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like I'm a B2B kind of native, and so I see amazing things happening from a B2C perspective on Instagram and TikTok, and I see that, you know, it's not just actually they're combining brand building and sales activation in one without even really trying too hard. You know, they're getting their brand, especially in fashions and retails and, you know, other things. Like, there's some awesome things being done in that space. And I think if you're clever and you have, you know, the right call to actions and you use the right trusted voices, then then they're absolutely all in for some of those sort of B2C, more B2C and B2B, and some depending on sort of the consumer. In the case of really choosing your social channel, it's a huge, it's a decent investment of time. And I think that you need to be like, and again, I'll use an example of Render, just because it was a growing brand. We pretty exclusively used LinkedIn because we quickly identified that in the earlier stages, quickly identified that Twitter was just a promotion channel. There wasn't really any sort of drive. And you have to make these decisions. I think you could go, as you said, you could go Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, you know, whatever, TikTok, if that was your scenario. But really thinking about each channel is a project or a stream of thought in itself. And so I think that we went pretty hard with LinkedIn at the beginning, and that really paid off. We built a followership of kind of, you know, 6,000 pretty quickly. And that's in a universe where there's probably, you know, 5,000 companies that we're selling to. That was like enough for us to build that wave.
Mm-hmm.
And that was done through really understanding who those followers were, what content was going to respond, and, you know, continuously managing the data and analytics behind it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just continuing to grow it. And then When we had enough critical mass, that transferred over into Facebook, and we started to get people just following us naturally on Facebook. They wanted to understand what we were doing in the day-to-day. So some of these folks were like rural construction, other guys who probably weren't as advanced on LinkedIn, but they were kind of wanting to seek us out. So it's almost like the audience and the market were saying to us, actually, we want to be over here too. We want you to be over here too. So it's interesting. And, there's always just the simple old ask people where they experiencing most of their content, where are they spending their spare time. There's lots of industry information out there, but I think as far as social media channels, or which is really a lot of the broadcast and engagement channels that most brands have, it's really about choosing wisely and not thinking that it's a spray, a single spray to all channels. It really needs some thinking behind it.
And the truth is, we just, especially as a business is smaller or scaling up, they just don't have the resources. We just don't have money and the resources to do that. So I think and I think that's a mistake we made early on, where we wanted to be on every channel to, grow our following on every single channel, but then realized we were just reposting, and the context for the content on LinkedIn is very different to the context for content on Twitter, as you pointed out, or X as they call it. So we learned that probably a little bit the hard way. One thing that did really sort of sing true to us was to make sure that we just got the handle for the business name on all the platforms, even if we weren't doing anything with it. Because as you said, you then were able to go to Facebook. So I think that's probably worthwhile. That's what I learned, through our experience. But yeah, definitely where talking about where the buyers are, I'm kind of thinking about, I know in the last 8 years, we've seen quite a significant shift and changes in the audiences that we've been, using organic content to reach, as well as people who've been, working with us. How have audiences and buyers changed? Like, what's really changed over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'll say one broad stroke is I think they've become far more discerning in their purchase and their research, and their they want to see trust. So that's why most people are going to your case studies. They want to be like, what have they done? How have they done it before? How successful? Do I know the brands that they're working with? So that trust and proof, and it doesn't always need to be customer proof. Sometimes it's product proof, or it's, efficiency or productivity savings, you being able to confidently quantify what that value is and what that, the benefit is, I think is really important. So I think that would be the first thing. They've become more discerning and they're actively seeking out trust and proof. The second, I think, is then, if I just really put my sort of B2B hat on, is they are doing a lot of their research. They actually don't want early sales engagement. So there's a very famous Bain study about two takeaways. One is that if you're not on a day one list, so if you're not a brand, so if you're a Commonwealth Bank they're going to have a day one list of suppliers. They might deal with IBM, they might deal with SAP, whatever it may be. And so if you're not on that list, then 90% of the time you need to prove you're a challenger in that scenario, and you need to prove why you would displace one of those brands. So I think that's one thing. But then the flip side to that is that buyers are doing like super active research, and they don't want to be bothered until they're really considering the solution. So even if they have a day one list, they might be saying, okay, well, they're sort of who I'd probably consider. Who else is out there? And so having that digital presence and the ability to cut through. So they're doing not just the awareness. What are the questions, if you're thinking about, if you're a brand, you're thinking about, how do I then capture that kind of research phase? What is the question of that buyer that they're asking when they're going through an online research? So what are the questions? Is it, how do I reduce my resources by, how do I reduce my headcount by implementing this software? Or, what product is going to give me what product can scale with my business? Like every scenario is different, but it's almost like understanding the questions that they're asking at that awareness stage, in its very simplest form, at the consideration stage, so that when they do get to the consideration stage, then you can insert yourself, you can insert a salesperson, with some pretty well-oiled templates and sequences and things that they can reach out to these folks around. But honestly, before that, we've seen more and more that actually folks want to kind of have some view of their own before a salesperson comes in and sort of sells to them. So, or consults with them. I shouldn't say sells to them, but consults with them.
It's so interesting because, when you talk about business to business, I can resonate with what you talked about being a challenger consulting firm, if you like. And it's really interesting because the times where we've been able to get, in front of one of these, like Commonwealth Bank is, for example, a customer of ours, but when we've been able to get through there, it's really been through a past experience, word of mouth case study sort of scenario, which we talked about. It's been through obviously they're doing their market research and they're typically finding content that resonates with whatever their problems, as you pointed out. But otherwise, these really large companies I don't see and I don't feel are actually just out there, scouring, looking for random consultancies to work with. It's all going back to what we talked about around brand and building that trust. So I'm thinking on the brand part, outside of my business brand, I'm also an individual. I know some people don't like the saying as you're your own brand. But do you have any thoughts on the personal brand side of things, whether or not you're trying to sell yourself?
Absolutely. You've hit like one of my absolute winners is the personal or the employee brand. So coming from LinkedIn, it's been not necessarily indoctrinated in us, but if you literally do the math, and here's an exercise for you, Fatima, or for anybody else who's listening, is you look at a post that your company has shared, and then if you got all of the folks in your business to share the same post and you look at the reach, it's just 30 times, 50 times, 100 times in some scenarios, because people want to buy from people. And so whether it is, a company has to share its news, a company has to tell the story, but, something that I think is really worthwhile is, as a founder, obviously there's a personal brand element to that, but, empowering your teams, your leaders, the developer, whoever it may be in your business, empowering them to be able to tell your story is so important, just from a reach and a trust perspective. So I think it's actually something that people underestimate, really the impact it will have. And if LinkedIn, as an example, that's most effective in a LinkedIn scenario. It's less so probably in other social channels, but most people now are actively social selling or utilizing LinkedIn as part of their strategy. And so just the reach and the trust element alone, there's lots of studies. I'm happy to share some of those with you, and you can sort of attach them to this around what the benefit of that personal brand is. But then I guess the flip side to that is you then need to just have some sort of 5-minute plan that you put down as to what that brand should be. What is the tone of voice? What do you want to be famous for? What are the topics that you are an authority in first? Like Simon Sinek, I think there was a famous quote from him is, what topic could you talk for an hour about unprompted? So what, could you talk to someone for an hour about? And that kind of gives you a sense of, well, that's something that you are genuinely an authority in. And then secondary to that is then just that balance of kind of, they call it a rule of 3. And I think we've talked about this. It's that promotion. So company promotion, it's about third-party insight or insights. So how do you leverage existing industries or, other bodies and what they're saying to really support your message or, endorse what they're doing. And then thirdly is really just kind of the profile building, which is, your own personal brand and the things that you stand for, and the human element of people don't want to be fired product and company information the whole time. There needs to be some humanness in that. And, what are your interests and personal views and things like that? So in that rule of three, I think that's how you can think about it, is like promotion, third party insight and endorsement, and then, how do you bring the human element to your profile?
It's interesting because I hear when you hear like talking to friends and whatnot, they'll say, oh, I can't sell myself, or maybe they get really comfortable and they're in a role for a really long time. But then, as we've seen in more recent years with like COVID and whatnot, a lot of people lost their roles, and then because they weren't building a community, a network, or a brand, it made it really hard for them to secure an interview or to be at the top of an interview list, or to, they had an idea to start a business, but they didn't really have anyone to talk to find out where to do that. So even though it seems like icky to sell yourself, I even struggle with it sometimes as well. I know that attempting to know what my personal brand is, my values, has made a big difference, for me. So I think it's really important. And I think that the rule of threes really would help people to do that moving forward. You said something about tone of voice. Could you explain to listeners what is tone of voice? I think they would be curious to know.
Yeah, tone of voice is really how you want others to understand you. Almost they say the personal brand is sort of like you walk into a room and how do you want people to perceive you? It's similar, but just in a virtual and digital environment. So your tone of voice is like, how do you want to walk into the virtual or digital room and have people think, and have what people think about you, or have them think of you, is sort of where I was going. Because I think that's then, are you playful? Are you kind of authoritative? Some people want to have that real, are you, energetic? Are you frequent and always on? Because I think that's the other side of it is, you need to, inconsistent, LinkedIn favors you if you post consistently. That is one of the rules of the algorithm. It is that you're posting natively, so your own content, and that you post as frequently as possible. So I think being able to have the balance of energy and value in what you're saying is important.
It's it's something you definitely taught us early on in our business, and we reference that a lot. And one thing as a technique we've used, we actually leverage that when we're writing content, or when we're having sort of content design. We actually say to anyone that's working with us, or if we ever engage a writer or whatnot, to leverage that, and then they use that as part of the supporting material to help us put together whatever it might be. So I think that's really really powerful as well. In terms of just thinking about, like, you've been in this space for over 20 years, and particularly a lot more in the tech space as well. So thinking about, is there any lessons that you would recommend marketing leaders, whether they're, early on in their career or further ahead, to really consider? Because it seems like marketing, particularly with the social side of things, is changing so fast, like it's almost hard to keep up.
Yeah, I think that one of the points we talked about earlier around marketing and sales alignment and being a strong partner to sales is something that cannot be underestimated. And in any interview I've had for a role, I think that's been where, like, if I'm talking to a CEO, that's where their eyes have lit up, because it's that understanding of how you can play well, support, understand what a sales process looks like, and add value to that process. Like, I know that it's kind of counterintuitive that you're as a marketing leader, you're talking about sales, but I think that interplay between marketing and sales needs to be rock solid. And I think so that's one thing from a marketing leadership perspective. For anyone who is not, I know most would be thinking about that, but maybe aren't as selflessly as they should be. I think that's interesting. What else from a marketing leader? I think the foundations are important, and often, particularly if there's a change in marketing leaders, people would often come in and just go, okay, well, just assume that the basics are done. And I think going into some of those things like messaging frameworks, having personas, your buyers, your personas, messaging frameworks, and understanding what that corporate positioning is, and getting it right, and revisiting it often is really important. even like I look at Render right now, we've been in market successfully for probably about 4 years in the US. And we've just, again, revised our offer and our value proposition after doing it sort of 2 years ago. And so that is the frequency that you need to be able to come in and really shake it up again and go, is this working? Is this not? Talk to sales, talk to customers, talk to the market. Where you can, to sort of really understand, not just at a product level, because I think people do a pretty decent job at a product or a customer level, understanding if they're getting what they need next, that sort of thing. But I think really like in a more broad brand or a platform or a solution or whatever it product might be, it's really about sort of understanding what is happening in the market right now and how we're answering that.
What would you say is, if you're thinking about your typical small business, like what we were when we first engaged you, what would you say is the biggest bang for buck that I can do, or that I put, if I've got very limited resources, that would help with that, obviously, sales activation, the opportunity to, bring in sales? What would you say if you had to pick one thing or a couple of things that you would tell me to focus on if I'm very limited in resource and budget?
Yeah, I think that you need to build a couple of cornerstone pieces of content. Like, I think you've done a great job of that, Fatima, and I know it's a heavy lift, but if you are producing small pieces of little bits of content here and there, they're having that effect. They're just having small ripples, whereas you need to be able to kind of come in and go, am I creating a new category or am I not? That's the first step, is like, am I creating a new category? If I'm not creating a new category, what's the existing category that I'm fitting into? And then what education is needed in that category that I can provide? So then you can then say, okay, I'm going to produce one single piece of cornerstone content that's going to help me to tell connect with this audience and this category really well, because I'm adding value immediately, but then also have, throughout that, you're going to have your messaging littered throughout. So whether that be, speaking opportunities, whether that be webinars, whether that be a guide, whether that be a report, whether that be a co-branded report, probably actually in the start, you wanted to keep your brand pretty, not siloed, but strong. You want to invest in your own brand first before you be partnering with others. So I think that's interesting. And then I think just starting to work out how you can build your audience pretty quickly. And so lists, companies, associations, because without the audience, you're singing into an empty hall. And so you need to be able to, have a great CRM or a basic CRM. HubSpot does an excellent job in this space, and be able to build out some view of your audience, segment them, understand it, get the data right. Between those two things, that'll give you just a bit of a toolkit to get started. And that is again straddling brand building as well as lead generation or sales activation. So having that sort of thought leadership education focus at the beginning, I think is not misguided in any way. I think that sort of would be the first step, and then your lead gen efforts after that, that's a whole other conversation. But they're the things that then you need to sort of switch to once you've had that education and brand in market for a while.
I think it's really good advice, and I didn't really think of it like that when you talked about spraying lots of bits of content everywhere and then getting lots of bits of reaction or interaction. But we had like a really large white paper a few years ago, and that was like a really, like as you sort of said, educational cornerstone piece that has still been paying dividends in terms of, not in terms of revenue, but in terms of customer and knowledge, loyalty, etc. So I really like that. I think sometimes in our business we kind of try to do a bit of both, and maybe we need to step back a little bit. So I'll take that on board for sure. And as you said, like the category pieces resonates as well, because sometimes they say I often hear from all of the B&I sessions I used to attend, that you can't sell to everyone. If you're selling to everyone, you're selling to no one. So I think that's something that I've got to remember as well. So no, that's really good advice. We're almost out of time today. Was there anything you wanted to
already? Gosh,
I know.
Too fast when you're having fun, huh?
I know you'll have to go round two. I've got one more question for you today, but is there anything else you wanted to cover that we haven't spoken about that you wanted to bring up and talk about?
I think that, you know, I hear, and I know we've talked about this, marketing is hard. And a lot of people struggle with it. And so first of all, I want to leave folks with, particularly those who are in that sort of journey of growth, be easy on yourself, because it is hard. And, you know, tap into your network, follow brands who are doing well. And look, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. You don't need to imitate, but you go, wow, I liked that about that. You know, how could I think about my brand that way? So I think that it's baby steps in that respect. So go easy on yourself and get the advice when you need it.
Amazing. Well, you've answered my last question, which was if there was any advice, a call to action, or a question you wanted to leave the listeners with. So on that note, how can people connect with you and your business if they wanted to reach out and learn more?
Yeah, look, the easiest way is LinkedIn. So I think you'll probably share my details, but Alicia Kearns, the growth CMO is also my tag. So I think you'll see through my profile. I welcome messages, invitations, and happy to really. I'm highly invested in making brands, helping brands to grow, and so even if it is just a bit of a free advice and a question here and there, I really I get off on that stuff. So I think that's an open invitation. But if people are seriously looking at that stage where they've probably got to a point and just need some more advice to get them to the next level. They're going to a new market. They're just getting to that 5-10 mil and want to go larger. That's really where I think I add a lot of value. So I'm really happy to talk to brands sort of doing that sort of stuff.
Amazing. I will make sure to include all of your contact details in the show notes. Alicia, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed working with you a few years ago, and hopefully we can do something again. So I highly recommend people connect with you. Thank you. And we'll definitely talk further, I'm sure, after this. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I've really enjoyed our chat, and I look forward to the next work for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?